Hi folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I am doing yet another edition of our Q&A live stream about freelancing topics. Sorry, I just lost my voice briefly. I have a little bit of Mio water here. I'll give that a shot, see what happens. Anyway, apologies for that, but I guess them's the breaks when you do as many of these videos as I do. So before we get too off the rails, this week's question is freelancing as viable for a data scientist as it is for a programmer? So I do know that probably some fraction of the authors in the Hit Subscribe author pool and in the broader community do have a focus on data engineering, data science, etc. And I think the real thrust of this question is it's a pretty well-worn path to go off on your own freelancing as a programmer. But would the same be true of somebody who is getting into data science? And I think the person asking this, if memory serves, is asking it from the perspective of somebody who might go out and get some education in data science with the idea of going into that as a career path as opposed to their current skill set as a programmer. So let's dive into that a little bit. I think the first thing that I'll do is define data scientist as I understand that, and that is admittedly potentially slightly an incomplete understanding because that is not my background. That's going to serve two purposes. Number one, if you're watching this and you're not familiar at all with data science or the concept, it will introduce it to you. But number two, it will kind of explain it to the prospective data scientist from the perspective of me, which is a business owner, and how I might reason about hiring a data scientist in some capacity, given that my understanding is imperfect or incomplete compared to that of an actual data scientist. So I'm speaking from the perspective of a potential buyer who's not going to understand your craft as well as you do. And so I think that has some merit. So my understanding of data science, or let's call it more broadly like data engineering, is that it is a programming adjacent craft or discipline. And I say programming adjacent in that I think it has kind of come to popularity or use over the last bunch of years in the wake of application development as a discipline. So if you look at the start of, I guess back to like the days of mainframe programming, but when I was getting into computer science in the 90s and the 2000s, you had people building traditional applications and then web applications and eventually all sorts of applications, mobile applications. And with building all of those applications alongside just light years of progress in the storage technology in terms of like storing files and information on disk, you had this absolute explosion of the amount of data that is stored in the world. So you can go back and read about like the original Apollo missions, taking the computer with the amount of hard disk space of something just vanishingly small, like a floppy disk. That kind of speaks to how much data there is in the world these days that has come out of all of this application development we've been doing. So for instance, any app that's on your phone, there's all kinds of application data being logged, all kinds of data being sent back to various servers, probably too much if you ask most people. Facebook's whole data model is, or business model is mining all kinds of demographic data about you and selling it to whoever wants to pay to know what you do and what you would buy. So there's a lot of data in the world, not all of it being nefariously collected or whatever. So basically this discipline of data science, I believe, has arisen out of and in response to that and is sort of programming adjacent. So all of these applications that exist in the world just spit out all kinds of data that gets stored in places. With the rise of all of that data, there is now motivation to go and take a look at that. So, all the data that's stored in your CRM or that's stored about your usage of a particular application, people that know a lot about these things can go in and clean up that data, meaning they can add fields to it where it's incomplete and do things to make it more easily compared with other data. So they can clean it up, they can store it in a kind of consistent format and use it to detect patterns and even to make predictions about things that might happen. So a good example of this is you can use data science or data intelligence or something to gather a bunch of data about some web application that's running. And if you see certain leading indicators, like a spike in the amount of visitors or something to the site, you can actually predict when it might start to fail. So data science or data engineering or whatever is this idea of focusing specifically on data that you're gathering, looking for patterns in it, and then using it to make predictions or to gain insights. So that's the TLDR, the imperfect but decent understanding of it that I have as a layperson. So hopefully that makes it clear to some of you watching, and also makes it clear to those of you who specialize in this how a business owner like me that is in the tech space but maybe not an expert would view it. So can you use this discipline? Can you take this discipline, become familiar with it, and then use it as the basis for a freelance career? Let me give the TLDR answer for it after setting up this context here. My opinion is, is it as viable or more viable for freelancing than programming? My TLDR take on that is, it is less viable in the short term, but it is more viable in the long run if you are going to be a prospective business owner. So let me say that a different way. Freelancing as a data scientist, I think, is harder in the early going, but I think there's more upside and a higher chance that you will become a true consultant and equity business owner as opposed to just kind of a pair of hands for hire. So I think there's more upside to it, but it's going to be harder for you to get going. So let me unpack that and get into this from a nuts and bolts perspective. So your actual work as a data scientist, is this viable as a freelancer? Is this viable for going into business for yourself? And the answer to that is yes, it's extremely viable, because if you think about the nature of what you're doing as a data science or somebody who's specializing in data, you are going out, and there are going to be elements of this that are sort of labor oriented. So like setting up a corpus of data or gathering data out of a database is probably going to involve scripting and munging and doing certain things using certain tools. A lot of that's going to look like programming, and doing ad hoc queries of the data. There's a lot of overlap between that and programming. But the nature of what you're doing is you are gathering that data and looking for patterns in it by leveraging data analysis techniques, perhaps machine learning, that type of thing. So you're looking for patterns, and then you are specifically furnishing insights back to the person that is contracting this type of work. I want to pause there and emphasize what we're talking about. Furnishing insights, making predictions, giving them insight into what their data is telling them about their business or certain elements of what they're doing, etc. So by definition, the data scientist is taking a look and thinking from I've talked about this in other videos, I don't know if I have specific links, but you're not doing labor as much as you are specializing in diagnosing problems and prescribing therapies. So I'll often talk, and this is borrowed from Jonathan Stark, has talked about this over the years on YouTube. I'll try to remember to link to his site in the description. But that there's kind of 4 phases of problem solving if you're an independent. There is the diagnosis of the problem, there is the prescription of a therapy, application of the therapy, and then reapplication of the therapy, like sustaining. And from a pure value perspective, the diagnosis of the problem is the most valuable thing, followed closely by prescription of a therapy. Application of the therapy is important, but it's less valuable. It's more commodified. And reapplication of the therapy, less important and more commodified still. Most programmers, you are hired to do labor. You are in the application of the therapy. So if you are hired to help somebody improve the performance of the website, you're not involved in the strategy at all. The diagnosis of the problem. Now, you might think of diagnosing the problem, like why is the website performing badly? But that's not really a first-class problem for the business. Usually that problem is something like, our website is performing slow and we are losing traffic, which means we're losing day-to-day revenue in our sales. That's the real problem. So why are we losing money? Oh, it looks like the website is slow, orders are down, our volume is down, etc. That is the diagnosis of the problem. Then somebody somewhere says, okay, we need to go out and hire someone to work on these particular pieces of the ORM and the software. That's what's causing the problem. They bring you in to work on that. So The problem has been diagnosed by other people. The solution has been prescribed by other people. You're now just there to do labor. That's in the programming world. That is the most common way that you will freelance as a programmer. Somebody else has diagnosed a business problem, decided what to do, and you're brought in to be some cog in the application of the therapy. As a data scientist, you are being brought in to diagnose problems and to kind of prescribe solutions or even create a solution prescription framework, meaning if you are setting up infrastructure, like the way I mentioned with the website, to do early leading detection of potential outages, and then notify the right people, you might even be working on something along the lines of forget notifying the right people. Maybe we can actually build this thing to course correct. So you are actively involved in diagnosing the problem and prescribing the therapy, and maybe even like end-to-end solution without any actual human being involved in the labor per se. So you are much more likely as a data scientist right now in 2022, and I'm recording this, to be considered a true consultant. You're being brought in for your expertise and understanding. You are creating actual infrastructure to diagnose problems and prescribe therapies. So you're either doing it yourself with your work, or you're setting up an infrastructure to do it in automated fashion. So you are absolutely in the thinking rather than laboring world here. So is your work viable? Oh my goodness, yes, it is. It's viable, it's valuable, it's probably a hot thing to get into. Now, the reason I say it's short or harder in the short term is more tactical than anything else, and it has to do with positioning. So first of all, I mean, this is a sort of minor nitpick, but I wouldn't bill yourself as a data scientist. Scientist, I would bill yourself as a consultant or something, and I'll get into more specifics in a moment. But like scientist kind of sounds like cost center, and it kind of sounds like an expensive, quixotic R&D thing that I don't want to invest in as a business owner of a business of the size of InSubscribe. So if you, for instance, came to me and were like, I am a data scientist, and I could go in and find patterns in your CRM to help you lead score and tell you which kind of clients are most likely to result in the sort of business you want, I would say, why didn't you lead with that thing that you can do instead of this bit about you being a scientist? Because I don't want to hire scientists. I don't have really an R&D budget. Oh, but what I would like is to, disqualify bad fit clients earlier. So that kind of gets to the point of what I'm talking about, which is one of the tough things you'll have about viability and early going is this world where if you're comparing it to programming, that is very much a labor brokerage world. You go on Upwork and you're like, I'm a programmer, and people, bring in commodity labor. So you're commodity laborers to do the programming. So you are going to have to think about how to position yourself. And data scientist isn't how I would do it. Consultants specializing in helping you disqualify bad fit clients and land better ones is closer to what you want to be doing. So this is really about positioning. And as a data scientist, I don't know that you're going to want to go around saying I'm a data scientist for hire and I'm kind of a generalist in that world, because as a freelancer, that's probably going to result in you only being hired to do general data science work by consultancies specializing in data science that want to bring you in as an employee or a contractor under their umbrella, or maybe large firms that are looking, that have like a data science group and they're looking for staff augmentation. That's the only way you're going to get hired, is kind of a staff augmentation. I am a generalist data science person. So I think what you need to do instead, if you're going to freelance as a data scientist, is to zoom in on a particular piece of intelligence that you're providing. Now, that might be something like, so this would be better than just I'm a general data scientist, is like, I'm a platform specialist. I, help present insights to you around your CRM. That might be better. So I'm going to bring you in because you're good at like HubSpot and pulling in data from other things to go along with HubSpot and giving information to me as a business owner. So that's good. It's better in terms of setting up a practice. And you could maybe like take HubSpot, for instance, actually become like HubSpot certified or be a HubSpot partner and have them get the word out for you. But I think better than that would be to start to zoom in on what kind of question can you answer for your client. So in that world, The one I came up with off the cuff, as a business owner, I might say, I seem to, or well, I mean, not me directly, but our sales seems to, be spinning their wheels a little bit on bad fit clients. It's hard to identify that up front. You, as a data scientist, might say, okay, I'm going to go in, gather some data, do a little bit of regression analysis, and then spit back out to you a handful of factors you might never have thought of that can identify bad fit clients much earlier. Hey, great, that's interesting. You could probably make a living doing that with service-based businesses. But there's a lot of other things that you can do too. I mean, I could rattle these off pretty easily. You could almost certainly make a living in and around things like Google Analytics. There's a lot of really ugly, incomplete data in marketing automation, HubSpot, Google Analytics, Marketo. How do you identify leads that are landing on your site and determine which content campaigns are working well and which aren't? Um, so those are just examples I can come up with off the top, but really what it goes back to is you need to figure out what kind of question or questions you want to help your prospects answer. And ideally, those should be questions where there's a lot of money on the line. So, for instance, helping customers that are bringing 100,000 plus people a month to their site figure out how they can improve their conversion rate a little bit is huge economic value. So I would say that really your course to doing good, valuable freelance data science type work is to start to hone in on what kind of insights you can bring and how those are economically valuable to your prospective clients. So then you aren't selling yourself as a data scientist, you're selling yourself as an expert in helping people leads or service-based businesses like do lead scoring or helping anybody get more data out of their Google Analytics. And ideally it should be better than more data out of Google Analytics. Like you can help answer questions like, why did we just take a haircut on Google's new helpful content update, or why are we losing traffic or something? The more specific the questions you can answer, counterintuitively, the easier it will be to sell yourself. So you're probably, I say counterintuitively because you're like, well, if all I do is answer the question, why is my traffic falling off, that's way too narrow. I'm worried that's way too narrow. Sure, it might be too narrow, but it's so specific that it's a good starting point. I guarantee you there are some people asking that question, and when you help them answer that question, you'll start to gain additional insights into what other questions they have, and then you can, in your practice, kind of group those all together and figure out how to package it up more broadly and not make it as vanilla as like I help you just figure stuff out with Google Analytics, but I help you achieve this outcome with your business. So in the end, I would say if you are contemplating becoming or being indie, I think data science personally has more upside than being a programmer by far at the moment. Programming is pretty saturated and it's pretty commodified. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're still going to earn a nice six-figure annual income as a programmer. That's not going anywhere, but it's hard to differentiate. If you're just hanging out your shingle as a programmer, it's kind of like getting a job as a programmer. Like there's so much demand, you're going to do it, but it's going to be hard to really make to have like a lot of income upside above like what the market commands, because being a programmer these days in whatever tech stack is quite commodified. You are pretty undifferentiated from other programmers. I think that's less true of a data scientist as long as you start to talk about what question you're helping answer or what questions you're helping answer for your prospective clients. So hopefully that makes sense. And I will catch you all next time when I will actually be in a different venue because we are going to relocate to the East Coast near Boston for the next few months. So I will catch you all later, and thanks for watching.